Well, thank you, Dr. Linchowski. Thank you all for coming to this, which is our inaugural Marine Corps Intelligence Association and IWP lecture, the first of a series which we're going to continue hopefully for a number of years. So I don't see this stopping anytime soon. The purpose of it is really to assist Marines with professional development, expose them to topics and subjects of which they normally wouldn't encounter in the normal course of their duties, and also to to share that Marine Corps experience with the students of the Institute and with the members of my association, which is the Professional Association of Marine Corps Intelligence. We've actually been around for about 20 years, but it's obviously a pretty insular little group. We're trying to expand that and help the Marine Corps intelligence field professionalize and reach out to the intelligence community and academia establishments like this. Publish a monthly magazine called the INSUM, or actually quarterly, which has gotten some real kudos lately. And it's just a real honor to be able to have the General kick this series off. Marine Corps intelligence is a little different. That may seem strange. I mean, we fight on land, we come from the sea and do that, but there are some particular things which have shaped us starting in World War II. There wasn't a whole lot of intelligence involved, that just identifying where bunkers were on Japanese-held islands, and it was pretty simplistic. And it's been evolving and improving ever since then. The characteristics, and I think you'll get a real sense of this from General Groen, is that we rarely have a lot of time to develop the situation. And that's part of our crisis response mission. And a commander rarely has a lot of time to absorb a great deal of depth, so we've got to boil situations down to the very essence very efficiently. So the pertinent facts and delivered on time exactly when needed. The world's gotten very complicated. It's gotten way more complicated than I recall in the Cold War. So Colonel Groen, or I'm sorry, Brigadier General Groen, is absolutely the right man to be leading this charge at this point. He originally hails from Michigan. He's been a commander at all levels in Marine Corps intelligence. He's been a G2 in combat, which is pretty much what we all strive for. In Iraq, multiple tours in Iraq. He led the Strategic Initiatives Group in the Marine Corps, and is truly a strategic thinker. And as you see some of his writings and hear the brief, I think that'll come across in spades. It is very much my honor to introduce General Mike Groen.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I do appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. I apologize that we couldn't get here earlier today, so I'll talk fast, I promise. And although I'm a military officer, so I got to have a PowerPoint, otherwise I can't. My mouth doesn't work. So I have the PowerPoint here, but I got a couple points I'd just like to make with you all. And what I'd like to do is kind of just touch on real quickly what Marine Corps missions. Talk about some of the challenges of the current operational environment, the information environment, the human environment that we deal with, and then talk a little bit about what we're doing in Marine Corps intelligence to adapt to that new environment. Okay, if you just go to the next one, please. Most of you are familiar what Marines look like and the kind of things that we do today. Next, please. Most of you also might have a picture in your head of what Marines did in World War II, and so that legacy, although we're very proud of our legacy, that doesn't really reflect the kind of things we do today. Linear amphibious assault from close into the beach, that sort of thing is certainly historic moments and made a legacy then. If you go to the next one, please. But that's not really what we do. Today, we use a variety of platforms and methodologies to maneuver, use the sea as maneuver space. So whether that's in an amphibious ship, whether that's in a high-speed connector craft, like a hovercraft, something like that, whether that's in an MV-22, an Osprey, or a CH-53 heavy helicopter, whether that's in a swimming tractor or another amphibious vehicle that can move directly across domains from the sea to the land. That's what we do today. Our current concept is called Expeditionary Force 21, which really articulates how do you do this in a modern environment. If you go to the next one, please. We like to think of ourselves as the force of first resort, and everybody thinks of, hey, the military arm is often considered the force of last resort. But if you look at the kind of missions that the Marine Corps does, especially now with our ability with the MV-22, and I point out the graphic on this slide. The MV-22, the tilt-rotor aircraft, we've had them for a few years now, is absolute game-changing technology for the Marine Corps. So those of you familiar, it's an aerial refuelable aircraft that can carry about a platoon of Marines. So with that aircraft, you can operate a combat radius of about 350 nautical miles. That's out and back, in a single mission. Because it's aerial refuelable, you can double that. So you can do a mission to 700 nautical miles. Imagine now the ability for the United States to reach out from sovereign territory, maybe an acre or two of sovereign territory afloat off a coast anywhere in the world, to be able to intervene in the littoral areas of the globe up to a depth of 700 nautical miles. If you look at the United States, for a 350 nautical mile radius, for example, off of the coast of North Carolina, would put you somewhere, maybe New York City, maybe down to Savannah, Georgia, or something like that. With an aerial refueling capability, which we also bring to the fight, just look at your interdiction range goes all the way down to, say, southern Florida, all the way up to, Rhode Island, and in a depth inland of maybe Illinois, so that's the kind of combat radius, a combat intervention that you can do as a force. So we are not the Army, we're not a second land army, we're not talking about maneuvering masses of men and material, but if you need to reinforce an embassy quickly, or if you have an airplane that's down and you need to get a force on the ground to secure that until you can bring in a larger force to effect a rescue or a retrograde, if you need time to buy strategic decision making, in the White House, in the Pentagon, or wherever, there's a full range of capabilities that the Marine Corps brings to bear. If you look at this, this trace along the littoral regions of the globe, the long littoral, some have called it, all the way from the Korean Peninsula, through the Med, all the way down to the Gulf of Guinea, and I keep wrapping this thing around. If you look at where some of our problems are today, an investment in the Marine Corps buys you a capability to move to wherever the crisis is, and then be able to intervene swiftly when that happens. Our commandant, for another less than a week here, is fond of saying today's crisis with today's force today. So it gives the United States the ability to intervene quickly where that's required. Next, please. So let's talk about the future environment, and you all know this environment very well, but globalization, clearly, if you track the AIS tracks from commercial shipping that moves across the oceans, about 93%, that percentage goes up and down, about 93% of global trade, global commerce moves along some very specific sea lanes, through some very specific choke points in the littoral environment. If you consider that much of our security rests on the prosperity that comes from global trade and an interconnected global environment, you can see how critical this space is to the United States. We might not have a whole lot invested in Yemen, but we have a whole lot of interest in what happens in the seas around Yemen. And pick your Straits of Malacca or the Straits of Taiwan or the Panama Canal. Pick your favorite strait. It's essential not just because we might be interested in the area around it, but it fundamentally underpins our prosperity and our security as a nation. Next, please. And that works multiple ways. So, artifact of the information age, identity politics. No surprise to you, certainly. But identity politics changes changes, it starts to erode the Westphalian system, right? And so what happens in that case? Then state starts to fail. Suddenly embassies are not sacred territory anymore. Suddenly embassies are vulnerable. Suddenly embassies are a way to get attention. If you seize the American embassy or you seize an American diplomat, just imagine the attention you can draw to your identity, whether that's a religious identity or an ethnic identity or a linguistic identity. Pick your poison. You know, here's a selfie taken at the consulate in Benghazi. You know, that guy is practicing identity politics, not national politics. Next, please. Urbanization. I love this picture. Urbanization. You read, what is it? 54% of the Earth's inhabitants now live in urban areas, right? And so we think, oh, great, they live in urban areas. They got swimming pools, and they got 7-Eleven down the block. No, really, they live in urban areas like this, global slums. So the global slum population is about 1 billion people now, out of what, 7.5 or 8. It's estimated that population will grow to about 2 billion. So it'll be about 20% of the population by 2030. So that number continues to explode. And you can imagine the security challenges. First, for the host nation, whatever nation that is, to provide security, water, sanitation, any disaster response to the inhabitants of these massive slums. And that problem is just going to get worse. If the state fails, and if the state cannot provide security, then the residents will provide security for themselves, whether that means mob rule or hiring a gang or whatever it is. And you see those kind of behaviors and those characteristics across the globe. Next, please. Crowded battlefields. We see today the massive human displacements associated with conflict, whether that's refugees coming out of Syria. So I think coming out of Syria, Lebanon has about 1 million+ Syrian refugees in Lebanon today. What an incredibly destabilizing factor for a small state like Lebanon. Turkey has another, I think, about 800,000. Jordan, another, 750,000 or so. This particular picture is taken in Juba, in South Sudan. Where again, in this case, tribal ethnic identity politics is driving those factions, and what squeezes out when those factions squeeze together? Massive humanity. These people are huddled up against the fence at the airfield in Juba because they know there are UN peacekeepers at the airfield, so they think they can gain some measure of security. They won't be killed if they can huddle up next to that fence line and be protected under the guns of those UN observers. This is not a singular picture or situation. Next, please. 7th century ideologies. I probably don't have to go into that very much, but the problem with 7th century ideologies, if you go to the next one, is that they turn into generational violent extremism, right? So that kid cannot go back to Australia. That's an Australian, Australian father or Australian mother. I think a Lebanese father. So he's in Syria when this picture was taken. You're probably familiar with this picture, but this child was taken to Syria by his father to fight the jihad. So this child is holding the head, decapitated head of a Syrian soldier. That child will never be right. That child cannot go back from this violent extremism. This is a generational thing, this identity politics practiced from generation to generation. Next, please. And that environment exists, 7th century ideologies exist side by side with modern lethality. So not only do you have, ISIS soldiers, firing man-portable air defense systems, you have things like a Club K, which is a set of anti-ship cruise missiles that exist in a shipping container. Can you imagine any place in the world where you might be able to hide a shipping container? Can you imagine any place in the world that you cannot hide a shipping container? Imagine the threat that this is a carrier killer. There's a sign here. This is advertised for sale. I mean, this is an international arms sale of a ship-killing system that hides in a shipping container. Who do you think that might be aimed against? I love Amazon. Amazon talks about delivering packages to your door with a quad rotor, right? That's one of their tests right there. If Amazon can deliver a package to your door with a quad rotor, just imagine all of the heinous, nasty things that other people can deliver to your door, or to your command post, or to the refugee camp. with that same technology. We have this in our universities today. This is well within the technological state of the art. Holy cow, what are we going to do? 2006, that's a Merkava tank, an Israeli tank, that when Israel went into Lebanon in 2006, they were met with a range of technologies that utilized by Hezbollah that really caught the Israelis by surprise. They were not prepared for a technological fight to the degree. And similar to us, and there's a great, it's a great campaign for military officers to understand the overconfidence that comes from a perception of dominance. You know, if you enter the fight thinking that you're technologically superior, you have this sense of dominance, and we've had that luxury as an American force. There's a very strong lesson that's a capability that fades quickly, or a delta that fades quickly. Next, please. Cyber threat. I just read this afternoon. In 2013, $100 billion of economic damage due to cyber attacks. $100 billion worth of damage. Just incredible. And hundreds and thousands of attacks against government servers, against university servers, against corporate servers, you name it. All some to steal, some for corporate espionage, some for regular spying, some for economic advantage, you name it. It's real and it's out there. Next, please. The technological rise of the rest. It's maybe hard to see from where you're sitting, but that's an iPad, and there's an app for that to include being able to fire mortars out of a compound. In this case, it was Syria. Those are Syrian rebels fighting against the Syrian army. But you know, that app is out there today. So this is this erosion of technological dominance that I talked about. I like to use the example of night vision equipment. You know, in 2003, you know, so just 10 years ago, give or take, you know, we had night vision equipment, and we went into a place like Iraq, and our enemies did not have night vision equipment. So the stuff that we had was kind of crude, and it was first generation, maybe second generation equipment, but we could see at night, and they could not see at night. Big step function and difference in capability, right? So now we go into the same fight, and we might have fourth generation night vision equipment, but our enemies now have first or second generation equipment. It's no longer a step function of difference, right? So the technological rise of the rest means that that qualitative edge is really, really important, but it's eroded from what it used to be. We cannot walk into a situation with an assumption of dominance, whether firepower dominance or intel dominance or whatever. The technological rise of the rest is something that's very real, and it's here with us today, as evidenced by these guys here. Next, please. So it used to be, so if there are any Clausewitzians in the room, you know, classic warfare is an extension of politics, right? That's how it's taught. Warfare is how it's taught to me. Warfare is an extension of politics. You know, for the last, certainly the last 6 or 7 years, maybe more, we've really practiced warfare and politics side by side. And you know, for politics, you could substitute diplomacy, but we've drank 3 cups of tea. We've hunted down insurgents. We've done these things simultaneously across the spectrum. I think it's just interesting to look at the way, like, the Russian campaign in Crimea and Ukraine has evolved, and you really start to think about, wow, in that model, you're almost using politics as an extension of warfare. That is, you have military or diplomatic objectives, and you're actually using, whether it's, you know, taking your soldiers out of uniform, whether it's using proxies, whether it's, you know, pick your methodology, but it really starts to create, you know, set political conditions so that your enemy cannot counter your actions. This is politics as an extension of warfare. It's a regime that we will struggle with. I mean, we'll struggle with it. We struggle with it today. I think we'll struggle with it even more in the future. Next, please. Technological change. So important. So 20 years ago. So did anybody remember bag phones? Right, mid-90s. Right. I would have asked if anybody had one, but you know, so mid-90s, bag phones came out. So suddenly, imagine this: you could make a phone call without queuing up at the payphone at the airport and putting money in. You know, making a phone call tethered to the wall. You could actually make a phone call not tethered to the wall. Isn't that remarkable? Just amazing technology. 20 years ago. If you go to the next one. So here's what we have today, right? iPad 6. So look how much technology has evolved in 20 years. Just look at the power that young people have in their hands today, that we all have in our hands today. You know, who needs to know how to read a map, right? There's an app for that. Who needs a camera? There's an app for that. I show this picture to young Marines because they think this is all they know, and they think, wow, okay, look, aren't we an impressive generation? Look at the technology we have. My message to them is the pace of technological change is actually accelerating. So if you go to the next one, you know, what does tomorrow look like? You know, so we all laugh when we show a picture of a bag phone, right, from 20 years ago, and we laugh and we go, you know, what an archaic technology that was. That, you know, it's ridiculous to even think that was, you know, that was a useful piece of technology. 10 years from now, when will we look at the iPhone 6 and say, really, you had to carry this thing in your hand, you know, and you stick it in your pocket and it would break when you sit down, or you drop it, you know, as you're getting into the cab? Really? You know, where are we going? Just, you know, on that accelerating technological curve, where, you know, I caution the youngsters, don't get confident with technology as you know it, because we are on the absolute cusp of a progressive, you know, I saw a video the other day that said we live in exponential times. I don't know if anybody, in The Economist last week, there was a, you know, the Chinese checkerboard example, right, where the Chinese peasant, you know, brings the game of chess to the emperor and says, you know, and the emperor loves the game and says, I'll give you any reward, and he says, well, let me, you know, what do you want? He said, well, all I want is this. I want 1 grain of rice on the first square, and I just want you to double it, you know, every square. So I'll give you 2 grains of rice on the next square, and the king and the emperor says, well, of course, you know, that's easy. Well, you know, the first maybe 15 squares, that was well within the king or the emperor's ability to do. But once you get to that exponential starts to really matter. What seems inconsequential suddenly becomes massively changing. This is where we are in technology today. And so this massive change of technology really is going to take us to exponential times. It will absolutely just change the game, much like, you know, that checkerboard as it starts to, that chessboard as it starts to fill up with rice. Soon there's not enough rice in the world to meet that demand. Next, please. So here's another one of my favorite pictures. So what is this thing? It's a horseless carriage, right? It's not a car. It's a horseless carriage. When the horseless carriage came about, it wasn't a car. These guys aren't going to a drive-in movie. They weren't, you know, driving down the interstate or, you know, going down the Autobahn. It was a horseless carriage, right? So what do you do with a carriage? Well, you go from point A to point B in the local area. So now I don't have that smelly horse there. I just have this internal combustion engine. But what is this? Well, it's just something that I go from point A to point B in the local area, right? It's just a carriage. That's a piece of technology. But now we all know the massive social change that's an artifact of that advancing technology. So we just talked about this exponential change in technology, right? Just think about the exponential social change. Think of the Industrial Revolution. Think of where we are. And so if you think about the lag time between, you know, the invention of the steam engine or the invention of, you know, the proliferation of electronic lighting, for example, or electricity, wired electricity, you know, there's a lag between the invention of a new technology and suddenly its massive proliferation and the social change that comes about as a result of that. Horseless carriage is a great example. You know, what would we do with our automobiles, without our automobiles today? And what are we going to do some few short years ago, or some few short years from now, when our cars drive themselves? There's no reason to have one of your own. You know, they're ubiquitous. You know, what kind of social change is that going to manifest? Are we ready to live in that world, first of all? But I guess more importantly, are we ready to start making things happen in that world? Are we ready to, you know, how do you do diplomacy in that kind of environment? How do you do non-governmental organizations in that environment? How do you do military operations in that environment? This is the challenge that we wrestle with today. Next, please. So the new normal, everybody says new normal. The new normal is just plain normal, right? I mean, so we've already crossed that bridge. This collapse of the, I'll say erosion of the Westphalian system, not collapse yet. But, you know, all of the principles that nations and their armies are founded on suddenly don't seem quite as solid a ground as they used to. And so we expect people to act in a Westphalian way, and they don't, and we're confused by that, and we don't know how to react to that. you know, what is the Free Syrian Army? I mean, it's not Syrian. It's not, you know, it's not really an army. What, you know what I mean? How do we react to this? Clearly, you know, there's an increased demand for interplay of those tools, whether it's diplomacy, politics, you know, non-governmental organizations, and military tools. Working in coalitions. So we've gotten really good at working with NATO allies, especially our Five Eyes partners. But broadly now, you see, you know, if you look at the kind of things that we're doing today, you see us working in coalitions almost as a necessary action if you want to achieve large-scale results in a situation. Wars of ideas instead of just wars of weapons, and I think we talked about that. I like this phrase. It means we have to spend a lot more time focused on the social sciences of war, not just the physical sciences of war. So in the Pentagon, across the river, there's a lot of folks you know, who are just fascinated with weapons. They're fascinated with, you know, invisible jets, and they're fascinated with anti-ship cruise missiles, and they're fascinated with the next, you know, the next vehicle or tank or, you know, whatever it is. And that's good, I guess. It's expensive. But what about the social science of war? You know, how do we change minds? How do we change, you know, in this identity politics environment? How do we get folks? How do we change the way people think and change the way they act? Because that, in the end, that's what we're trying to do, right? We want to change behavior. We want to force somebody to do something that they wouldn't otherwise do, whether we're diplomatically arm twisting them or whether we're applying force against them. You know, how do we do that? I mean, that changes the equation. It changes the way you build your force. It changes the way you equip your force, et cetera, et cetera. The other one, I just threw this on here because I'm an intel guy after all. Depth of understanding. So you all know you can't address a situation like Syria in sound bites, right? You have to have a depth of understanding. You can't address a situation like China in sound bites, or Southeast Asia, or Africa. The stories are too big, they're too broad, they're too deep. So how do you build that kind of situational awareness in decision makers' heads so that they understand the full depth and breadth of the situations that they're making decisions about, or they're employing force, or whatever it is? How do you do that? Next, please. So how do you do that from an intelligence perspective? So now I'll just go back home here a little bit. First of all, you can't have any cold starts, right? So the old sort of Westphalian model again of an army is war is a binary thing, right? You're either at war or you're not at war. That doesn't exist anymore. So especially your intelligence arm of whatever service has got to be on all the time. You have to be anticipating crises. You have to be able to respond almost instantaneously when you encounter a crisis. You need to operate with precision. So precision weapons are obviously one manifestation of that, but we say operate with precision. That means you need to achieve just the right effect at just the right time with just the right people. So that means maneuvering with precision. Don't send 100 guys if 10 guys will do. Don't send 10 if you need 100. Creating a broad operational reach, which means, you know, we remember the MV-22 combat radius I showed you. You know, if you can send Marines from a ship 12 nautical miles off a coast somewhere in international waters, 700 nautical miles inland, wow, you got to think about, you know, do you really know what's happening 700 nautical miles from here inland? Very difficult intelligence challenge. And then how do you create tempo? By, you know, as you put Marines, in our case, you know, put Marines in a dangerous situation, how do you help keep up their situational awareness so that they know what's going on around them? They know how the decision environment is changing very dynamically around them. In that kind of modern lethality environment, where now that the rest can hurt us really bad, you know, how do we protect Marines and put them in a situation that they will be in a position to succeed? Inside the Marine Corps, I like to challenge our Marines with this. Here's our real mandate. We have to outthink our enemies, not just outfight them. So again, that has an implication for how you build a force, how you train people, how you equip people, and what kind of tools you bring to the fight. Next, please. So real briefly, so we have just launched what we call our McKisery Plan, Marine Corps Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Enterprise Plan. And so, nice looking cover, you know, dirty faces, guys jumping out of airplanes, it's really cool. Next. And in that plan, then we've broken down how do we design this enterprise to be able to address the kind of environment that we think Marines will be operating in the future. There's, it's real easy. It's intellectually lazy, but it's real easy to just to look in the rearview mirror and be prepared for what happened yesterday. Even be prepared for what's happening today. It really, but if you think about the pace of change, technological change, social change, you gotta really be forward postured. You have to be focused on the force you need tomorrow. Our threats evolve at the pace of Moore's Law, right? The U.S. military evolves at the pace of the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution cycle, right? The PPBS cycle. That's a 6-year cycle. I mean, it's ridiculous. How long can you? Even if you start way out ahead, if you start out a whole rice field ahead of that guy who's only got 1 grain, if he's doubling every 18 months, how long does it take him to catch up with you? Not long, unfortunately. So we've broken this up into, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but an operational design. How do we fight our intelligence force through all these different scenarios? A functional design. What kind of systems and architecture and data sharing strategy do we have? Process design. How do you get young Marines, at whatever tactical extremity, to be able to leverage the architecture and the operational design. Partnership design, that is, who do we work with on the modern battlefield, and who do we need to build partnerships with, who do we need to integrate operations with, and finally professional design, which is our investments in people. How do we train people differently to succeed in this new environment than we may have done today or yesterday. Next. So I liken it to building a rope, right? How do you build a rope? You take little threads and you wind them together and you put them under tension, right? And then you get little strings, and then you take strings and you wind the strings together and you put them under tension, and then you take, maybe get cords, and then you take cords and you wind them together and you put them under tension. And what do you get? Eventually you get a rope, and a rope is strong, right? And you can pull a ship with a rope. You see tugboats doing it every day. A rope is just nothing but threads. So how is it that threads can pull a ship? Well, they pull a ship by being aligned, where everybody's pulling in the same direction. Everybody knows what the thread on the right and left is doing. It's built under tension, so there's natural strength because you've planned for that, for that stress. Next, please. And so for an intel enterprise, we take all of our disparate nodes across the Marine Corps, all of our intelligence capabilities, on the East Coast and the West Coast and in Okinawa and on ships at sea. We take all those nodes and we weave them together. We weave them together into an enterprise that's always on, that's doing intelligence all the time, whether they're deployed forward or whether they're back in the rear. We give them an architecture, a data architecture, and processes and systems that allow them to work together and to reinforce each other. We integrate new sensors into the battlefield. In fact, we like to say every Marine a collector, in that we want every Marine or platform to be a sensor to contribute to this common knowledge and this common understanding. Then you raise the bar on your people, right? So we've established now a series of certifications depending on the functional specialty, so that now you don't just go to, many of you have experienced this military model where you go to a school when you enter the military, and then that's it. Maybe you get to another school, maybe you don't. We're eliminating that model, so we're creating for our young enlisted Marines as well. So we train them through a series of professional steps. It's almost like a apprentice, journeyman, master craftsman kind of methodology, where we continue to invest in them over a career. Okay, next please. So I didn't talk as fast as I would have liked, but I think it's important stuff. So that's your Marine Corps. That's what we're doing for intelligence today, and we feel so in the intelligence community we have a very tight, and Mr. Barth here can attribute. We've got a very tight group of folks who are compelled by this operating environment, compelled by the challenges of tomorrow, compelled by our inadequacies today, and we're getting the job done. We haven't been caught short yet, but that day's coming, and we're working as fast as we can to keep that day further and further down the future. So ladies and gentlemen, that's my pitch. Do we have any questions? I have time if you do, sir. In the back first.
Sir, first of all, thank you very much for coming. Just wanted to ask you about the auxiliary strategic plan. What do you see as the major friction points in operationalizing it, and how will you surmount them?
So yeah, thanks. Okay, so great question. So not everybody in the Pentagon thinks this way. You'd be shocked to understand that. So even in the Marine Corps, I talk to our folks about how do you bring the Marine Corps into this sort of awareness of the compelling changes that are happening around us every day. You kind of have to show the way, right? So we're working very hard to, but we work inside the systems and the bureaucratic processes that we have today. So that's kind of the real answer. How do you make something like this real in an environment where PPBS is the rule of the day, right? So there are entire floors on the Pentagon committed to budgeting and programming and planning and monitoring execution, that sort of thing, and that's great. It's a necessary function, but when that drives your combat development capability, then you really have a problem, and we have to come up with methodologies to go much faster. So I would say that sort of institutional inertia is our problem, to overcome that and get that forward-looking and forward-leaning. Closely related, though, is the personnel structure. So we've got a industrial age sort of manpower system in all the services, I would submit. So how do you take an industrial age manpower system where you're bringing in lots of people, you're training them to a fairly low standard, and then you're pushing them out, and and that's not a disparaging comment, because our young Marines, for example, I mean they go out and they learn quickly, and they're incredibly smart kids, and they learn quickly, but they learn from their peers, and they learn from example, and they learn from the technology they use at home, and that's all good. But how do you professionalize that, and how do you do human capital management as some of them start to rise up out of the crowd, and you start to say, hey, you know what? She is really smart. She really understands how to do this. How do we protect her then and make sure that we continue to invest in her skills as she moves up, or as the case may be? So that's those sort of industrial age institutional processes become our worst enemy, if you will. Almost anybody would agree with the compelling necessity to change, but even if they agree, they're very reluctant to do it sometimes. Sure.
General, again, thank you for your presentation. Is part of your plan, you may have covered this, how do you look to integrate the specialty of intelligence with the overall function of command? And one of the most important things to, in my estimation, amateur though it may be, is the ability for commanders to have credibility and trust in their intelligence officers. Yeah. Certainly for your specialists, those career opportunities are relatively limited, but do your officers within the intelligence field do non-intelligence work, or do you have field commanders that spend time with the intelligence community so that there's greater cross-pollination?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Matter of fact, where's Noah? Can you step up? So 20 years ago, almost exactly, the Marine Corps did not have a professionalized intelligence corps. So it was a lot of folks who practiced intelligence, but they were never really formally trained in it. You couldn't come in as a second lieutenant and stay an intelligence officer for your career 20 years ago. So those officers who entered that pipeline 20 years ago are now are 20-year veterans, right? And so they are now our battalion commanders, and they are now, so there's been an incredible sea change in the professionalization of the intelligence corps, so that's a good thing. But one of the challenges, especially in a service as small as the Marine Corps, is we're an infantry organization. We have airplanes and we go at sea. And
every Marine a rifleman.
Every Marine is a rifleman, absolutely. And so how do you build that kind of credibility in an intelligence officer? We have intelligence commands, and that's important. And they're just as challenging, I would submit, more so in many cases than a line unit. But you still need to prove yourself on the street. If you can't do that, then you're really not much of an intelligence officer at all, I would say. So
So with their boss, sir.
Pardon me?
So with their boss, sir.
Yeah, exactly. So I never want to lose, and so here's one of our great challenges, is that unlike the other services, the Marine Corps doesn't have a large sort of general support intel capability. Almost all of our intel capability, almost all of our intel Marines work for commanders, operational commanders. We don't have an INSCOM, we don't have a FISRA, we don't have these other intel organizations, large intel organizations that the other services have. So what we really have to do is get commanders to buy into our enterprise vision, to say, hey commander, we're going to be using your intel Marines to create this enterprise. And that means you have to cede a little bit of control about their day-to-day tasks, but what you'll get in return is access to this mutually reinforcing enterprise of nodes. So if you get in a jam, something bad happens in Korea, it's not just you guys out on the Pacific that have to worry about this. We can all contribute and all support you. So that's how we kind of continue, by getting commander buy-in, we continue to make sure that the intel enterprise is not something that sort of just goes off on its own. Intel is too important to be left to intel guys, right?
Agreed.
So you gotta make sure that you got commanders on board every step of the way.
Thank you, General.
Sure. Another question, sir.
Which technological change do you think is the most disruptive, if you had to pick out one? And don't say the internet or the knowledge economy, because that's a cheater.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. So we're just starting to see this one, but my favorite example is Watson, right? So Watson, the Jeopardy champion in 2010, I think it was, I think it was 2010. So think about Moore's Law and think about Watson. So Watson, 4 years ago, was a computer that took about half of this room. So Moore's Law, a number of different formulations, but one says, the size basically of your information technology halves every 18 months, give or take. That's a rough. So just think. So if that was a small room full of technology to create Watson 4 years ago, now it's maybe a quarter of that. That's something you could take to the field, right? And let's just say 3 years from now, it's something like this big. Now you've got that sort of, just imagine if Watson was your intelligence analyst. Hey Watson, we're about to go to this place, South Sudan. Tell me about South Sudan. I can tell you, all the information you want, and you don't even really have to ask. So it's not so much it's the social change that comes from technology, not the technology itself. So those processes that allow you to analyze and access information, the series and the Watsons that will I'd love to do for intelligence what Google did for searching. So when you type in Google, when's the last time you actually filled in the whole field? You fill in like 3 letters, right? And what you're looking for is right there, because Google knows you and it knows what other people are looking for. When an intelligence analyst, who's working a South Sudan problem, has that kind of technology at her fingertips or his fingertips, they don't have to ask the questions. So they don't have to spend time looking for data. Data will self-organize and find the person. So now imagine, you don't have to have a whole bunch of intel guys, traipsing around with a commander somewhere to provide. The commander, that intel picture could be an avatar on this guy's shoulder, right? And this is well within the technological state of the art. So this is not a dream. I love the day to see the day when a commander says, you know what, I don't need all these intel guys, because I get this little avatar that tells me everything I need to know. Little understanding that it's all the intel guys that are inside that avatar, right, that are making all this happen. But this is the sort of it's not 2 transistors onto 1 chip. It's what you can do with that information, the processes, and I think these information management, information handling processes are going to be just enormous social change as a result. Sir.
General, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I wanted to ask you about what the Marine Corps is doing amongst its intelligence officers so that they would develop a nose, so to speak, and a set of instincts for understanding other cultures on those other cultures' own terms.
Yeah.
There are we've discovered that that one of the great problems in our government is mirror imaging, where you look at other people as if they're just like us. And there is a real case to be made for any kind of, for at least for a certain cadre within the intelligence corps to have this very in-depth cultural knowledge that can only be picked up by, you know, intensive reading, by interaction, and, you know, perhaps travel in the society, all sorts of different ways of doing it, but particularly by really good knowledge of the language, which opens up the entire way of thinking of the other culture. And I'm wondering, how much of a premium do you put on that?
So we do put a premium on it. Now I would say I think we're beyond nascent stages, but I think what we have today in many of the services, I can speak for the Marine Corps, we have a lot of great programs, you know, whether it's a regional affairs officer program or foreign affairs officer program or an attaché program or you know, any of those sorts of things. All of our young Marines, regardless of their MLS, so intel and non-intel guys alike, when they come into the service as an officer or when they get promoted to sergeant, they gain a regional assignment. So I won't call it a regional specialty because there's nothing special about it yet. But what we give them is a regional assignment. So if you are, you know, Second Lieutenant Groen graduates and now is you know, an African regionally assigned, then the idea is that that Marine will continue to study. We have a bunch of sort of on your own time language training programs. So that Marine can invest in understanding the language. That Marine can invest. We have all the readings and all the associated things. So that program exists. It's not as robust as I would like, and that's one of the projects on the list. Is how do you start to link these things together? So you know, maybe when you come in as a lieutenant, you gain a regional specialization, or you're assigned a regional specialization, and then you work that through a career where you have assignments in that region, perhaps. Or you do a regional affairs officer curriculum at a formal school or a foreign affairs curriculum. So, and maybe you are graded for, you know, your ability to pick up a second language or a third language or whatever it is. It's not a lack of talent. You know, we've got young Marines who will learn a language just to do a mission. You know, hey, bud, you're going to deploy, you know, to this island in the Pacific somewhere in 3 months, and the people there speak this dialect of a language you've never heard of. We've got Marines who can learn a language in months. I mean, it's miraculous. So how do we harness that? I don't know. I'd like to get those educational pieces in place. But the other thing is, in the curriculum that we train today, there's a great deal. We spend a great deal of time on, you know, for example, logical fallacies and, you know, analytical bias and that sort of thing. So we train even our youngsters, not even our officers, but our youngsters as well. How do you overcome analytical biases and that you're aware of it? So we have a really, I think, a pretty good rigorous program of analytics. And we have, as part of our enterprise, I didn't get into the details here, but we have a sort of an analytical tradecraft group. And their sole mission in life is to go around and get all the good ideas from the young Marines, and then come to common processes and standards. And those analytical methodologies then become best practice. And we let best practice bubble up, and then we turn that into policy. Vice kind of the old model, right? Is you create policy and then you demand that everybody conform. What we do is figure out what best practice is, and we harvest that, and we collaborate on it. We get to what best practice really is, and then we make that the policy. So it's a bottom-up driven policy thing, and so that helps you with things like social media, for example. You know, what better way, if you really want to appreciate what's going on in Egypt, well then read the Twitter feeds that are coming out of Egypt, right? So we train Marines how to do that. And so the more data they're exposed to, the more sources they're exposed to, I think the more that cultural understanding comes into place. You have to deploy them too, though. You have to get them outside of the United States. So they really, you know, walk a dirty street, talk to somebody who doesn't speak your language, you know, be tired and run down and wet in a strange place. Then you know, you suddenly your global comprehension just expands exponentially. So.
Thank you.
Sorry. Anybody else? Another one?
Yes.
This will be our last question.
Oh, okay.
Then since I'm going twice, does anyone else want to take the last shot? Going once?
I've got a simple question. Is the 7th century ideology the latest politically correct way we express Islam?
In that case, yes. You know, but it's amazing. It's amazing, isn't it, that ideas from the 7th century are enduring, and they using modern technology in this information environment to persist. It's amazing the resilience of those kind of ideas.
The fact that it hasn't changed is really amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all written. It's not a reading.
So that's a quick one.
You gotta go.
Okay.
One more.
Actually, building on that gentleman's question, how successful can you truly reconcile modern data analysis techniques with 7th century thinking? I mean, there can be a tremendous risk in being overly data driven, because good data analytics relies that you stay within the relevant range. It's usually the stuff that happens before.
Yeah.
How do you create an organization that's not, or how do you help sustain an organization that is both willing to accept intuition and have a strong statistically and analytical background?
Yeah. So I mean, this is it's almost like a peer challenge, right? So how do you know what that guy's going to do 5 minutes from now? So I would submit to you two things. One, sometimes it's enough to know that that's a bad guy and I know exactly where he is.
Well,
You know, good enough. I don't need to know what he's going to do tomorrow because he's not going to be here tomorrow. That's kind of one methodology. The other methodology, though, is so that's good. Now, how do you start to get in that guy's head? I love the. Here's a mythology about intelligence. That intelligence is forecasting. It's not, right? Intelligence is climatology, not the weather report. I used to get all the time, so hey, the trend of IEDs in this little spot of our planet, is high. So we get, 30 IEDs a month. That's one a day. Great. Am I going to see one tomorrow? I don't know. Statistically, yes, you will see one tomorrow. But I don't know. The insurgent doesn't know. Honestly, it happens all the time. So, in Iraq, it would get cold at night sometimes. When it got cold at night, these guys would wake up in the morning and go, ooh, it's cold. I think I'm just going to stay in bed today. How do you can't forecast that. You can, it's how do you pull all those skills to understand the way people think. You measure signatures, you measure that, and then you try to, integrate it together into something like, yeah, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I can tell you generally how this is going to work over the next week or a month, and that's, sometimes that's good enough.
Because you get to kill them.
or convert them, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Convert them from the living.
All right, General, thank you
All
so
right.
much, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.